They came from the darkness between the stars. A fleet so large it blotted out sections of the night sky, each ship bristling with advanced weaponry, each hull gleaming with the indifference of an empire that had crushed countless worlds before. To the Galactic Empire, Earth was just another small, backwater planet, barely significant enough to warrant a full-scale invasion. Yet protocol demanded it be brought into the fold, annexed, conquered, and turned to serve the endless machine of galactic expansion. The Empire's admirals observed Earth from orbit, scanning the green and blue planet with their long-range sensors. The readings they gathered painted a picture of a world brimming with life yet distressingly primitive. Its technology was laughably outdated, its people divided and shockingly unprepared for an encounter with a force like theirs. To them, humanity was a curiosity, a leftover species from an unremarkable solar system. They imagined Earth's inhabitants as frail, panicked beings, scrambling in chaos before their inevitable subjugation. The Empire did not expect resistance, and the initial scans seemed to confirm that. Earth's rudimentary satellites, its scattered defense systems, what little of them existed, posed no threat. Earth wasn't even worth deploying their elite forces. They'd overwhelmed the planet in hours, they thought, barely needing to break a sweat. After all, they had crushed far more advanced civilizations without issue. Humanity would be no different. But down on the surface, as the first massive ships drifted into view, humanity did what it always did when confronted with something beyond comprehension. It paused, assessed, and adapted. For the first day, the world watched in shock. News broadcasts frantically reported the arrival of the unknown fleet, and within hours, panic began to ripple through every major city. It was real. This wasn't some natural disaster or human conflict. Earth was under attack from beyond the stars, and all of humanity felt the looming shadow of this new, unstoppable threat. Leaders from every corner of the globe convened, scrambling to make sense of the incomprehensible. Scientists pored over their limited data, trying to decipher what kind of weapons or technologies they might be up against, and military strategists assessed their options with grim expressions. It didn't take long to realize the harsh truth: Earth was entirely outmatched. Conventional forces wouldn't last minutes against that fleet. The most advanced jets, the highest caliber missiles, the best trained soldiers, none of it was going to make a dent against an enemy that could cross galaxies with ease. But amidst the sobering reality, a different kind of determination set in. Humanity wasn't going to go down without a fight, even if their options seemed limited. Defeated generals exchanged glances with world leaders, and a quiet understanding passed between them. If this was to be Earth's last stand, they would give it everything they had. One by one, the leaders came to an unorthodox conclusion. They could send their best soldiers, their top-of-the-line weapons, and it would be a slaughter. The aliens would cut through them with ease, further feeding their arrogance. Or they could try something else, something so audacious, so absurd, it might just give them a chance. They wouldn't send their elite. No, they'd send the reserves. The scrappers, the part-timers, the misfits who barely met the bare minimum of military readiness. They'd send the weakest soldiers. In a dimly lit briefing room, a collection of world leaders hashed out this strange plan. They knew that these soldiers weren't exactly what any sane strategist would consider battle-ready. But that was the point. Let the invaders think Earth was sending in its best. Let them think this ragtag force represented the full might of humanity. Maybe, just maybe, the aliens' overconfidence would be their undoing. And if this unusual strategy failed, at least they'd go down having tried something bold. And so, while the world held its breath, recruitment notices went out to an unlikely selection of individuals. A few veterans who hadn't seen action in years, reservists who spent more time in classrooms than in combat zones, and cadets whose training was still half-finished. Some had old equipment, or outdated weapons, and many of them lacked even the most basic tactical training. The Empire's fleet, hovering high above Earth, detected the faint signals as humanity's response began to mobilize. The Galactic commanders monitored the unfolding scenario with bemusement, watching the grainy feeds of Earth's hastily assembled forces preparing for an inevitable massacre. They saw ragged uniforms, shaky hands, and technology so outdated it seemed quaint. These weren't warriors, they were, at best, a gathering of barely organized amateurs. To the Empire's admirals, the sight was almost laughable. They scoffed at humanity's desperation, interpreting the ragtag group as a last, pathetic gasp from a dying world. Among the recruits assembled to defend Earth was Sergeant Hank Whitaker, an old-timer whose best years were far behind him. Hank had been in some of the last major conflicts on Earth decades ago, and had since spent more time training others than seeing action himself. He moved a little slower these days, and his once imposing stature had softened, but Hank knew every trick in the book. He could turn any scrap of junk into a tool, and if nothing else, he had a talent for improvising. Hank eyed the young recruits around him, shaking his head with a half-smile. "Back in my day," he muttered, "we'd at least look like we knew what we were doing." Then there was Private Jamie Gwynn, fresh out of the academy with exactly zero real-world experience. Jamie had been top of her class in simulators. She knew how to handle a joystick but had never held a weapon in an actual firefight. She watched as the others fumbled with their gear, doing her best to hide her nerves. All she could think of were the fleet simulations she'd practiced endlessly, but she knew this would be different. Still, she was eager to prove herself, hoping the endless drills and training would count for something. Next to her stood Eli Katz, a former IT technician drafted in due to a severe shortage of able-bodied soldiers. Eli had barely passed the physical fitness requirements, but he knew his way around tech like no one else. His primary battlefield had been a desk, troubleshooting network issues and setting up systems, not out here with armor and weapons. But he'd shown up, willing to do whatever he could, hoping that at least his tech skills would come in handy. "I'm not exactly combat ready," he joked to Jamie. "But maybe I can hack their weapons if I just find a Wi-Fi signal up there." Jamie chuckled, and it felt like the first genuine laugh anyone had had in days. Training began, if one could call it that. With outdated weapons and ill-fitting gear, each new drill exposed more flaws. Hank tried to teach the basics, explaining to the younger ones how to stay calm under fire, though their confidence was hardly boosted by his wheezing after every drill. Jamie struggled with her rifle's heavy recoil, nearly dropping it with every practice shot. Eli fumbled with his equipment, occasionally muttering, "How did we end up here?" Yet somehow, they found ways to make it work, patching gear with duct tape, adjusting broken sights, and adapting old techniques to outdated equipment. Whenever they hit a snag, Hank's dry humor kept them grounded. "Hey, I've seen worse. I once took on a whole squad with a broomstick. You'll get the hang of it." They joked and laughed between sessions, lightening the grim reality of their task. Jamie, with a smirk, nicknamed their squad the Rust Buckets, and soon enough, everyone was calling themselves that. There was a strange camaraderie among them, a shared understanding that they weren't exactly Earth's best, but they had each other's backs. Eli offered his own contribution by programming his old tablet to play upbeat music during training, and soon they were practicing their drills to a soundtrack of old Earth classics. The tunes lifted their spirits, and even Hank cracked a smile, humming along between barking orders. Meanwhile, aboard the Empire's flagship, the elite soldiers of the Galactic fleet observed their opponents with growing contempt. Through intercepted footage, they watched the human army struggle with tasks as basic as reloading a weapon or forming a line. The aliens laughed, sneering at the apparent incompetence of these so-called soldiers. One high-ranking officer, watching Jamie fumble her rifle, scoffed, "They're sending children to fight us. And broken-down relics." To them, it was clear, humanity was weak, ill-prepared, and barely worthy of their attention. Yet, in their scorn, the aliens missed what was right before their eyes. They failed to notice the way the humans' laughter held their spirits together, the way they adapted and improvised when things went wrong. Each mistake became a lesson, and each misstep brought them closer as a team. Where the Galactic soldiers trained with precision and discipline, the humans learned to think on their feet, to patch up issues on the fly, and to laugh in the face of an impossible mission. They might not have been efficient, but they were resourceful, unpredictable, and relentless. As days passed, a strange sort of confidence began to grow within the squad. Hank drilled them with fierce determination, his pride in each member growing as they learned to keep pace. Jamie found her footing, her movements becoming sharper and more assured, while Eli began rigging old communication devices to interface with the Empire's intercepted signals. They had no delusions of grandeur, but they were no longer the bumbling crew they had started as. Each one of them felt a spark, a fire they hadn't known before. And against all odds, the Rust Buckets were starting to feel like a team. Their equipment might be outdated, their skills might be lacking, but they had a fierce spirit that couldn't be discounted. There was a sense of pride in their ranks now, a shared determination to prove that they were more than the Empire's dismissive assessment. And despite the alien officers' contempt, the humans were ready to fight, even if the odds were against them. By the time they were set to face the Empire, they had become something more than just Earth's weakest soldiers. They were scrappy, rough around the edges, and not much to look at, but they were resolute. The first encounter was chaotic. Hank, Jamie, Eli, and the rest of the Rust Buckets found themselves face to face with the Empire's scouts, gleaming, imposing soldiers who moved with robotic precision. The humans, on the other hand, fumbled into position, some dropping gear or struggling to handle their weapons. Eli's tablet glitched, blaring an old pop song as they took cover, the upbeat melody filling the air, much to the aliens' confusion. As the Empire's soldiers advanced, they were prepared for a standard military engagement, expecting humans to retreat or surrender. Instead, the Rust Buckets broke every rule in the book. Hank yelled, "Scatter!" and the team burst into an uncoordinated scramble, darting from cover to cover without any set formation. To the Empire, this lack of structure was bizarre and laughable, but it made the humans unpredictable and hard to pin down. Jamie took potshots while ducking in and out of sight, missing more than she hit, but creating enough distraction to slow the aliens' advance. Eli crouched by a fallen tree, furiously tapping on his tablet, trying to patch into the aliens' comms. "Just need a minute," he muttered, ignoring the blasts of energy hitting the ground nearby. Finally, he broke through, scrambling their frequencies just enough to cause static in their earpieces. The alien soldiers hesitated, caught off guard by the interference. It was a minor annoyance, but it disrupted their precision. Meanwhile, Hank had grabbed an old EMP grenade, something salvaged from an ancient warehouse. It was outdated, a relic from a time long past, but he hurled it at the nearest scout. The grenade sparked in midair, releasing a burst of electromagnetic energy that wasn't powerful enough to damage modern equipment but managed to knock out the visual sensors on a few helmets. The Empire's soldiers stumbled, temporarily blinded, trying to recalibrate. Jamie and Eli exchanged a grin. Their outdated tech wasn't powerful, but it was effective in surprising ways. As the aliens regrouped, expecting the humans to retreat, the Rust Buckets instead leaned into guerrilla tactics. They used their surroundings, climbing trees, hiding behind boulders, and setting up distractions. Jamie even threw a handful of rocks as a makeshift diversion, which made one of the aliens hesitate, trying to identify the unfamiliar projectiles. Hank muttered, "Wouldn't pass for combat in any manual." But they were stalling the Empire, and that was a victory in itself. When the aliens tried to advance again, Eli made a quick calculation and patched into an old radio tower nearby. Within seconds, a series of loud, blaring Earth radio signals cut through the air, disrupting the Empire's advanced comms once more. Hank laughed. "You've weaponized our own radio jump, kid!" The alien soldiers were growing visibly frustrated, glancing around as if questioning how these bumbling humans kept throwing them off. One of the aliens finally barked an order to his troops, frustrated by the mess they'd encountered. They shifted to a more aggressive stance, but that's when Jamie got an idea. She signaled Hank, then dashed toward an old wrecked vehicle left nearby, hopping in and slamming the horn. The blaring noise filled the air, amplifying the confusion. Hank, seizing the moment, grabbed an old smoke grenade and tossed it, creating a cloud that obscured their positions. The alien soldiers fired into the smoke, hitting nothing but empty air. The Empire, accustomed to facing disciplined armies with predictable tactics, was struggling. These human soldiers didn't follow any patterns they recognized, and every time they tried to counter, the humans pulled another improvised trick. The Galactic troops expected an easy fight. Instead, they were caught in a maze of chaotic strategies that defied their logic. One of the alien captains, watching from a nearby ship, shook his head in disbelief. "What are they doing?" he muttered as his troops were stalled, their advantage slipping. The rust buckets were beginning to notice their impact. Hank, leaning against a tree, watched the aliens falter and grinned. "Guess they weren't ready for Earth's finest, huh?" Jamie rolled her eyes, but she could see what he meant. The aliens, for all their advanced tech, had no way of dealing with the rust buckets' unrefined but effective tactics. Earth's outdated equipment and unconventional approach had turned the battle into something entirely unexpected. As the skirmish wore on, the Empire's soldiers found themselves regrouping again, reeling from the bizarre engagement. For the first time, the humans' lack of conventional tactics played to their advantage. It wasn't that they were winning in any traditional sense. It was that the aliens were losing control. Every attempt to engage was met with another unpredictable maneuver, another improvised attack, another baffling counter. The Empire's soldiers, who had been so sure of victory, were forced to step back and recalibrate, realizing that these humans, these weakest soldiers, were far more formidable than anticipated. What the Empire had dismissed as desperation was, in fact, resilience. The rust buckets hadn't been intimidated by the aliens' superior firepower or advanced training. Instead, they'd adapted, turning their weaknesses into strengths, catching the Empire off guard. The Galactic soldiers, with all their tactical training, couldn't adjust fast enough to the humans' spontaneity, humor, and camaraderie. For the first time, humanity's smallest fighters were proving they could hold their own. The Empire's forces, unaccustomed to fighting an enemy that defied all logic, began to waver, their confidence shaken. The rust buckets might not have had the training or the tech, but they had something just as powerful, the will to keep going, even against impossible odds. And in that moment, the Empire's commanders, watching from their ships, realized that Earth's so-called weakest soldiers were anything but weak. The Empire's leaders were furious. Reports poured in from the battlefield, detailing a situation they hadn't even considered possible. The humans, this primitive, barely capable species, had managed to hold their own in ways that defied logic. From their grand ships above Earth, high-ranking admirals glared at holographic displays, each one replaying moments of failure and disarray. They had anticipated swift conquest, and instead, they faced a drawn-out, messy engagement that was making a mockery of the Empire's pride. Determined to put an end to the embarrassing stalemate, the Empire deployed more specialized units. Elite shock troops, armed with advanced armor and weaponry, were sent to reinforce the ground forces. The Empire's generals approved the use of new drones equipped with heat-seeking capabilities and reinforced barriers that were supposed to neutralize human interference. The message was clear: no more toying with Earth. This was now a campaign to restore their dominance and crush any notions of resistance. Yet, even as the alien soldiers landed with their state-of-the-art gear, the humans refused to back down. Hank, Jamie, Eli, and the rust buckets had grown bolder. They had tasted victory, however small, and each minor success made them feel unstoppable. Watching the Empire throw in more elite troops only fueled their determination. Jamie joked, "Guess they're running out of rookies, huh?" earning a round of laughs from the squad as they prepared for yet another unlikely fight. Despite the escalating danger, the rust buckets found new ways to turn their unassuming tools into weapons. Eli's tablet, though ancient by galactic standards, became their hub for sabotage. He'd adapted it to hack into the drone's frequencies, causing them to spin aimlessly or crash into each other. Watching one of the drones spiral into the ground, Jamie laughed, giving Eli a high five. "Didn't think you'd turn tech support into a battle skill," she teased. Eli shrugged, grinning. "Hey, who needs a weapons lab when you have a little Earth ingenuity?" The Empire's frustration grew with each engagement. Their drones malfunctioned, their troops were stalled, and the humans continued their bizarre and irritating tactics. The rust buckets discovered that old signal jammers could disorient the aliens' advanced targeting systems. They repurposed industrial flashlights to confuse thermal vision, and used old farm equipment as barricades, forcing the elite soldiers to navigate a series of makeshift traps and obstacles that no well-trained military was prepared for. Hank, ever the strategist, picked up on the aliens' reliance on rigid formation and precision. He led his team in quick, erratic movements, staying outside the Empire's standard engagement range, picking off the elite soldiers whenever they fell out of formation. With every successful maneuver, their confidence grew. "They're so used to order, they don't know what to do with chaos," Hank muttered to himself, his eyes gleaming with a newfound fire. Back aboard the Empire's command ship, the alien generals grew increasingly nervous. Word of the humans' persistence had spread among the ranks. Soldiers talked in hushed tones about the unpredictability of these weaklings, and for the first time, doubts began to ripple through the elite troops. Some soldiers whispered that Earth was cursed, that these humans were impossible to control. Others, previously loyal to the cause, felt a strange respect for the humans' resilience. They'd heard stories of desperate battles before, but this was different. Earth's forces weren't disciplined warriors. They were scrappy, disorganized, and undeterred by their limitations. As the Empire pressed on, the rust buckets pulled off minor victories that echoed across the human population. News spread that the Empire's supposedly superior forces were being outwitted by Earth's misfit defenders. Civilians rallied, their fears slowly transforming into pride and even hope. For the first time, they saw themselves as capable of fighting back, however slight their advantage might be. With every victory, however small, the Empire's aura of invincibility cracked. The Galactic generals, who had once scoffed at the idea of resistance, were now forced to reevaluate their tactics. An admiral, frustrated beyond reason, barked at his officers, demanding explanations. "How are these primitives causing so much trouble? They're weak. They have nothing." But the officers, staring at their screens, had no answer. Every prediction, every calculation had failed to account for Earth's ingenuity. It was as if the humans were immune to the very logic upon which the Empire had built its entire military strategy. The alien soldiers on the ground began to feel the pressure. They'd grown accustomed to easy victories, to foes who crumbled before them. But Earth's defenders were different. They weren't just fighting to win, they were fighting as though the battle was already lost, as if there was nothing left to lose. Some alien soldiers watched the humans, bewildered by the persistence they couldn't understand. A few even began to wonder what it was about this planet that made its people so unyielding. Among the ranks, rumors began circulating. Tales of human soldiers who fought without fear, who turned trash into weapons, who laughed in the face of certain defeat. The term, "Earth's weakest," was whispered with a strange mixture of admiration and apprehension. Alien commanders caught on, noticing how their soldiers hesitated now, their confidence shaken by the relentless humans. One of the Empire's veteran captains finally admitted to his superior, "They're not strong, but they don't stop. They don't retreat. Every defeat just makes them stronger." By now, the Empire was well aware that humanity wouldn't be conquered easily. The humans had done more than survive, they had adapted. The final confrontation was unlike anything either side had expected. The rust buckets, having fought battle after battle with ingenuity and grit, now faced the Empire's last, most powerful wave of troops. The air was thick with tension as the alien forces deployed heavy artillery, enormous drones, and their finest strategists, determined to end the standoff once and for all. But this time, the humans were ready. Every trick they'd used, every unexpected move, had been part of a learning curve, and they were about to throw everything they'd learned right back at the invaders. Hank, Jamie, Eli, and the rest of the crew had become a formidable team, turning their weaknesses into strengths and their inexperience into unpredictable advantage. They knew their limitations and used every bit of Earth's resources, scraps, old tech, and sheer nerve, to set traps, disrupt signals, and lead the Empire's elite units into choke points. Eli's tablet was synced to every abandoned antenna within reach, broadcasting static and white noise to confuse the enemy's radar. Jamie rigged together a series of distractions, setting off small explosions and flashing lights to lead the alien soldiers into ambushes. As the aliens advanced, their formation fractured. Confounded by the humans' seemingly endless tricks, they hesitated, their precision crumbling. They'd never encountered a fighting style that thrived on chaos, where the rules were constantly being rewritten. Hank coordinated his team with improvised signals, and the rust buckets moved with a practiced, unrefined grace that allowed them to slip through the Empire's ranks, picking off soldiers one by one. Finally, after hours of relentless fighting, Hank spotted the Empire's command unit, a central drone that directed the other troops through an encrypted signal. It was the Empire's nerve center on Earth, heavily armored and nearly impenetrable, but Hank had a plan. He signaled to Eli, who hacked into a nearby construction drone, sending it lumbering toward the command unit. As it neared, Eli overloaded its circuits, causing it to explode on impact. The blast wasn't enough to destroy the command unit entirely, but it created a gap, exposing the Empire's network to interference. The rust buckets sprang into action. Jamie hurled every remaining EMP grenade at the command unit, shorting out its systems in a dazzling burst of electricity. With their command unit compromised, the Empire's soldiers staggered, suddenly disconnected from their orders. In the confusion, Hank and his team pressed forward, overwhelming the elite troops with relentless, chaotic attacks that defied any semblance of traditional warfare. The Empire's best troops faltered, then fell back, forced to retreat in the face of an opponent they simply couldn't predict. Within minutes, the order to retreat echoed through the Empire's ranks. The humans had done the unthinkable. They had forced the Empire to abandon their conquest. As the alien soldiers pulled back, Hank and his team watched in astonishment. They had held the line, defended their planet, and now they stood victorious. A roar of cheers erupted from the rust buckets, laughter and disbelief mingling with shouts of triumph. Earth had won, and not by brute force or superior technology, but by sheer will and the human ability to adapt and endure. As the Empire's fleet lifted off and began to retreat into the void, a silence fell over the battlefield. Humanity's weakest soldiers had done what no one thought possible. They'd proven that courage and resilience were greater than any weapon or tactic. News spread quickly across Earth, and soon, the story of the Rust Bucket's victory was broadcast to every corner of the world. Celebrations broke out, and for the first time in memory, humanity stood united, inspired by the bravery of a few underestimated defenders who had refused to back down. In the weeks that followed, rumors spread across the galaxy. Word of Earth's unlikely victory reached far and wide, and stories of the humans' tenacity became a whispered legend. Tales of their strange tactics, their humor in the face of danger, and their refusal to be conquered grew with every retelling. Aliens who had once viewed humans as little more than insects to be crushed began to see them as something more, a force of nature, impossible to predict and even harder to defeat. The Galactic Empire, though humiliated, had learned a lesson. They had vastly underestimated Earth and its people. In private, their leaders reviewed the battle reports, each filled with bizarre strategies and unexpected outcomes. The humans were primitive, yes, but they were also relentless and unpredictable. For the first time, the Empire saw humanity not as an easy conquest, but as a unique and formidable species capable of defying the odds. For the Rust Buckets, life returned to normal, though they could never quite shake their newfound fame. Hank, Jamie, Eli, and the others were celebrated as heroes, though they joked that they were still Earth's weakest soldiers. They didn't need medals or titles. They'd earned something far greater, the knowledge that, against all odds, they had stood up for their planet and won. And as for the galaxy, Earth had made its mark. No longer would humans be dismissed as weak or insignificant. They'd shown that their true strength lay not in technology or training, but in their spirit, their resilience, humor, and unbreakable will to fight for what mattered most.